Welcome back. So as promised, we're now going to play with remote vSAN. And I'm going to do two demos. I expect the first demo to succeed. I expect the second demo to fail. I've mentioned why. But before I do that, I want you to notice my setup. Right now, you can see that I have a 5-node cluster and a 3-node cluster. There's a reason for that. Remember, one cluster has enough ESXi servers to be able to run a RAID 5 VM. The other one does not. So that's why I build them a little bit different. So I'm going to start by mounting the vSAN data store belonging to the second cluster in the first. So let's take a look at SA vSAN01. This is my 5-node cluster. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to putty into that host. Let's take a look. Right now, you can see that if I type df-h, this host can see only one vSAN data store, and that is SA vSAN data store 01. That's about to change, or at least it should. So what I'm going to do, as mentioned earlier, is I am going to select that cluster. I'm going to go to configure, and I'm going to go to data store sharing. Now, right now, remember, I only see my local vSAN data store. So remember, the local one is SA vSAN data store 01. Now, I want to mount the one belonging to the second cluster. So I'm going to click on Mount Remote vSAN data store or Mount Remote data store. And here you can see automatically, I only see the one belonging to the second cluster. So all I have to do is select that second data store. Click on Next. And here I'm going to see all those compatibility checks. And notice, as mentioned, I expected everything to be healthy. I expected everything to look good. Notice, I haven't exceeded the limit of 5 remote data stores. Notice, both my clusters are controlled by the same vCenter. Both happen to be in the same data center. And if you take a look, notice, it says, for example, vSAN format version supports remote vSAN. That means what? Both my clusters are running vSphere 7.0 Update 1. Now remember, you cannot do this if you're trying to mix one running 7.0 Update 1 with something older. So at the very bottom, you can see that there's also a latency check. Notice it says latency between client and server is below 5,000 microseconds. So I'm going to click on Finish. And again, this should work. Like I said, this is not too complicated. I expect in a few seconds to be able to see 2 data stores here. Now let's take a look at the recent tasks. Notice something is happening. Like I said, this will take a few more seconds. And what we want to do now is wait. Obviously, it happened now. We want to wait until the GUI refreshes. And now I can see 2 data stores, mine and the one belonging to the second cluster. So if you take a look, I have my local data store, that is the one called SA vSAN data store 01, and I have the second one, which again you can see is not my local one. And once again, I am the client for that second one. Now, what I want to do now is I want to take a look at some of my VMs, and I want to try storage vMotion. Remember, my second cluster has 3 hosts. What does that mean? That in that second data store, I can only put VMs that happen to be, for example, two-way mirrors. But I cannot, for example, there, put a RAID 5 VM. So let's take a look. What I'm going to do in this demo is I'm going to take a look at a couple of the VMs in the first cluster. Now let's take a look at the very first one. Now the very first one is this is the very first one. The very first one should be RAID 5. Let's see if I'm right. There it is. You can see the second one is going to be using the default policy, aka this VM is a two-way mirror. So I should be able to right-click on SAVM02. And again, I should be able to storage vMotion this VM. I'm going to choose Migrate. I'm going to choose change storage only. Remember, I'm doing storage vMotion. And if you take a look, I should be able to choose a second vSAN data store. Now, I'm going to click on next, and I'm going to click on finish. So again, that should be no problem. Let's take a look, make sure this succeeds, and then we'll do another demo. Almost done. Perfect. Notice it succeeded. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to putty into one of the hosts belonging to the second cluster. And I am going to go and obviously go to VMFS volumes. And then from there, I'm going to go to the mount point for SB vSAN data store 01. If you take a look, you can see the folder for that VM, the one that I just stored vMotion, appears here. I could do the same thing with the GUI, but I prefer in this case to show you the command line. Now remember, if I type df-h here, I only see one data store. But if I go back to SA ES601, I should expect to see two vSAN data stores. Perfect. Now, let's try to mount a second VM. Not mount, but actually I should say migrate a second VM. This time I am going to try to migrate SAVM01. Remember, this one is RAID 5. So let's see what happens. I am going to right-click on that VM. I am going to choose migrate once again. I'm going to choose change storage once again. And if you take a look, if I want to keep my existing virtual machine storage policy, notice it tells me that it is not compatible with the second vSAN data store. I'm talking about SB vSAN data store 01. If you take a look, remember, this one only has 3 hosts. This one has nothing more than 3 disk groups. So I would need really 4 full domains. I don't have it. That's why I build them differently. So I wanted to show you that. So that concludes my first demo. Now what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to show you this failing. So if you think about it, what I want to do now before I forget is I want to move this VM back to where it belongs. So what I need to do in this case is I need to right-click on that VM and I'm going to migrate this VM back. Let's put it back on SA vSAN data store 01. You know, this will take about a minute. And then I am going to unmount that remote vSAN data store. Let's take a look. Perfect. So I am going to go back to that cluster. And if you take a look, what I want to do next is I want to select SB vSAN data store 01 and I want to choose unmount. Once again, this should take a few seconds. Let's make sure that again we wait. And then before I try to mount it again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the second cluster and I am going to enable on the second cluster data in transit encryption. So let's take a look. Let's go to SB vSAN 01. Let's go to configure. Now I'm going to go to services. And what I want to do next, as mentioned earlier, is I want to enable data in transit encryption. Remember, this is a brand new feature in 7.0 update 1 as well. But if you think about it, this again is not going to be compatible. Let's wait a few seconds. Once again, this should take a few seconds. And then we're going to try to mount the vSAN data store again. Remember, the second time I expect it to fail. All right. So it looks like it just completed. So let's go back to the first cluster. Let's see what happens. I choose data store sharing. I select mount remote data store. I get to choose the second one. Now, remember, you can see the data store, but this is going to fail or should fail. If I click here, notice again the system complains, and it tells you specifically why this is not going to work. You can see it says there is a problem when it comes to cluster configuration being supported. And you can see it says data in transit encryption is not supported for either client cluster or server cluster. So that ends my second demo. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'll see you in lesson number 3.